Okay, hi everyone. So today we are going to look at into arson and explosives. So previously we have looked into forensic toxicology. Okay, so now we are going to look at into arson and explosives in terms of its definitions. Okay, we are going to look at into the chemistry of fires, the common cause of fire, what are the fire investigation basics, how are you going to search the fire scenes, and how are you going to collect and preserve the arson evidence. And lastly, we are going to look at into how are you going to do the sample analysis. Okay, so for explosives, we are going to look at into the definitions of explosives, types of explosives. You have two low and high explosives, and how are we going to search the scene and evidence collection. And lastly, we are going to look at into the explosive sample analysis. All right. So arson, what is arson actually? Arson and explosion, basically both of these events, arson and explosions, often present a complex and difficult circumstances to investigate. Usually, these two cases, arson and explosions, is quite hard for us, the crime scene CSI team, to investigate because the perpetrator the perpetrator has typically thoroughly planned the act. Okay, and also he or she has been long gone after the act, and the destruction is so extensive. So when 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 there is a question, or for some reason you have encountered this kind of problem in terms of why is arson and explosion is hard to investigate, because of these three reasons. Okay, so the perpetrator has typically thoroughly planned the act. Okay, the perpetrator has been long gone after the act, and the destruction is so extensive. All right. Okay, so let's look at the definition of arson. Arson is the conflagration or uncontrolled burning of any real property without consent or with unlawful intent. So now, in terms of definition of arson, there are two keywords here, which is uncontrolled burning of any real property without consent or with unlawful intent. Okay? So arson is prosecuted with attention to degree of severity in the alleged offense. So usually, when the people who plan the arson, usually they have um, the intention to cause a severe apa severe outcome. Okay, so the analysis of fire related incident, we call it as fire investigation. Okay, all right. So let's look at the chemistry of fire. So chemically, fire is a type of oxidation. So usually the combination of oxygen with other substances will produce new substances. In this case, when we looked at into this equation, you can see that it's methane combined with oxygen, it will become carbon dioxide and water. All right. So oxidation reaction typically results in a large energy release, mainly in terms of heat or light. In terms of heat and or light lah, right? So when we talk about chemistry of fire, it is a type of oxidation. It combines with oxygen. But yeah, it goes without saying, oxidation combines with oxygen. So produces new substances. So oxidation, usually it results in a release of large energy in terms of heat and or light, right? Okay. So basically, fire is composed of to produce a fire, it needs to be composed of a three sides, where we can call it is a fire triangle. Okay, so it needs oxygen, it needs heat, and it needs fuel. Okay, So this is the fire triangle. It represents three elements needed for fire to occur, which is in this case, it is heat, fuel, and oxygen. Okay? Alright, what is fuel? Fuel is any combustible material in any state of matter. It doesn't matter whether the fuel is in solid, liquid, or gaseous form. Okay? So, the example of fuel is clothing, furniture, curtains, flammable liquids. So usually it is anything that can be combustible, right? Okay, let's look at into oxygen. Yeah, oxygen, it is oxygen, okay? So the air we breathe usually is about 21% of oxygen. So fire requires at least 16% of oxygen. Okay, heat. Heat is the energy necessary to increase the temperature of the fuel to a point where sufficient vapors are given off for ignition to occur. Okay, when we talk about heat, heat is something that is going to increase the temperature to a point where your fuel tadi tu is sufficient enough to be ignited. So example of heat is stoves, heating appliances, fireplace, damaged wiring, or any kind of spark. Okay? Alright, so basically all of these three makes up the fire triangle which can create fire. Alright. So this is an example of heat transfer method in terms of when we looked at convection, conduction, okay, and radiation. So this is something that you can look at, okay? Alright. So, the common cause of fire. Now we are going to look at the common cause of fire. What are the statistics basically? Okay, so relatively small number of causes are responsible for a large number of fires. So, usually when we looked at the major causes of home structure fire, it's about 42% is corresponds to cooking. Okay. Heating is about 70% if they are using heater, okay, in their houses. Alright, intentional. Intentional is something the arson tu lah tadi kita cakap tu in terms of dia punya definition. If it's intentional, usually it's about 8%. Alright? Okay. So what are the motives for arson? Because when we looked at the definition, it is a conflagration or uncontrolled burning with the unlawful intention. So now what is the intention? Why do people want to do this arson? Okay. So what are the motives? We have 5 motives here. So basically, the motives are crime concealment, to conceal another crime such as murder, burglary, or vehicle. So we want to conceal another crime. Okay. Second one is revenge, to get back at someone for perceived injustice, monetary gain, spite or malicious vandalism, and lastly, mentally disturbed. Okay? Some person have been found to have a irresistible impulse to set fire. Okay. Alright, so that is the motives for arson. So an example of arson in Malaysia is that, so this case, I think this is a well-known case where the Pusat Tahfiz has been burnt, 23 has been dead, and 4 is seriously injured. So based on this case, okay, this is something that I will post a forum inside e-learning for you to be able to get the motives for this case. All right, get the motives for this case and get some case background of this case. What happens actually? All right. So all of you can maybe 2 or 3 lines of interesting facts about the case inside the e-learning. Okay. So this is going to be counted as your attendance for this section. All right. Thank you. So this is also an example, okay, Sungai Petani pre-dawn blaze, okay, this is something that you also can look into, all right? This is a fire at senior customs officer home being investigated for arson. So when you have been involved in at at a higher level, okay, so customs officer, so usually they are somebody who offers who had the authority to to meluluskan ataupun tidak meluluskan barang-barang yang you bawa daripada luar negara. Okay, so maybe this person uh, has some dispute with some other person. So back to the motives, which is revenge. So all of these cases are quite interesting for you to read. All right, so for you to have some idea in terms of what are the motives actually, why is this happening? Okay, all right. So now we are going to look at into the fire investigation basics. Right. So when you have arrived at the fire scene, okay, so you need to work from the least damaged areas to the most heavily damaged areas. Okay. So you expect that at the heavily damaged areas, you cannot get any usable evidence despite of the fuel at at the heavily damaged area where is the source of arson. Okay, usually at the at the vicinity of the least damaged areas, you will find much more useful evidence in terms of whether there has been a lighter where it can be the source of fire, okay, being thrown away, okay, or even there are some um, footprints, okay. So that's why we need to work from the least damaged areas to the moving upwards to the heavily damaged areas, okay. Okay, nothing should be moved until pictures, sketches, and notes are taken. Right? The evidence, you need to collect it in terms of what are the accelerant samples, the fire items, and other useful crime scene evidence that you think might be useful in catching the perpetrator. All right. So you need to also determine the point of origin. So the point of origin usually may be where the heavily damaged areas. Okay. Determine the heat source, interview the witness, and hypothesize the reason for the fire. So whether it is with unlawful intent or whether it is just a common case of arson, which is in terms of cooking ke, electrical malfunction ke, okay. So searching for the scene. So the arson investigator needs to begin examining a fire scene for signs of arson as soon as the fire has been extinguished. Okay? The necessity to begin an immediate investigation even takes precedence over the requirement to obtain a search warrant. So basically, when you have arrived at the arson scene, as soon as the fire has been put out by the bomber, so you need, as an arson investigator, you need to search the scene as soon as possible. The necessity to begin the immediate investigation has much more higher probability rather than for you to wait for a search warrant, right? Because you need to find accelerants, right? So accelerants, as we said, that is any material to start or sustain a fire. You need to look at, or you need to look for this accelerant first. Okay. So the most common accelerants are combustible liquids, because any petroleum residues that remain after a fire may evaporate in a few hours or days, so a search warrant is not required. So when when people ask you whether you need to wait for a search warrant to search for an arson cases, say no, because of these reasons. Okay, the most important thing, accelerants. You need to find accelerants. What are the types of accelerants that have been used? So accelerant is apa? It is combustible liquids. It may evaporate as time goes by. So that's why you need to find the accelerant as soon as possible. All right. So traces of flammable liquids residues may be located with a vapor detector. Okay, in this case, we can use a dog, which is a sniffer. So trained dogs can detect as low as 1 part per million. Right? That's quite interesting, actually. So experience shows that most arsons are started with a petroleum-based accelerants. So the search of a fire scene must focus on finding the fire's origin, which may be most productive in any search for an accelerant or ignition device. Okay, so usually, so as what we mentioned earlier, you need to work from outside out, from the least damage to the highest damage. But if you want to find the accelerant, so you need to go to the the fire's origin, which is the heavily damaged site. So you need to be able to search for accelerants in any ignition device at the fire's origin. Okay. Okay. So, some telltale signs of arson include that the evidence of separate and unconnected fires, use of steamers to spread fire from one area to another, and evidence of severe burning found on the floor as opposed to the ceiling of a structure due to the flammable liquid. Okay. Fire ni, dia spread upwards and outward tau. It looks like a chimney if you haven't looked into fire. When you look at this fire, at this picture, there's some sort of like a V pattern with fire. It started, okay, you can imagine it started in this, maybe in this living hall, in this house. So it moves upward and outward. When it moves upward and outward, it forms like a V pattern, which we call it the chimney effect. Okay, so basically it will not go down, right? It will not, if it is start burning from the ceiling, it will not go down, it will goes up. Okay, so the upward and outward with the V pattern, right? Okay, so V pattern, fire burns up in a V-shaped pattern. Wind can distort the V's. Okay, if there is a presence of wind, sometimes you may see the V, maybe V is quite big. Okay, in this case, when you see that, okay, you look here, you can see the V here. So basically, this is maybe the source of where the fire happens. Okay, right? The origin. So in this case, you can see that the fire started here. You can see the V is quite large. So this shows that maybe there is a presence of wind. Okay, because the V is quite extensive. All right. So char patterns and accelerants use. So created by very hot fires that burn very quickly and move fast along its path. So that there can be sharp lines between what is burned and what isn't. So often characterized by intermixed light, medium, and heavy burning in a puddle shape that corresponds to a shape of the original pool of the ignitable liquids. So usually, when we looked here, so this is where this is the char pattern. So usually you can see that this is the area where it is burned very quickly. Okay, so you can also see that this side is not burning. Okay, both of these sides is not burning. It's only burned here. So based on this char, you can see the path of the fire. Okay, all right. So how do we collect an arson evidence? All right. At the suspected point of origin of fire, ash and soot along with porous materials, which in this case the wood flooring ke, rugs, upholstery, or any rags, carpet ke apa-apa ke, which may contain excess accelerant should be collected and stored in airtight containers. Okay, this is very important. Okay, why do we need to use airtight containers? As our previous justification is that inside this materials there might be some residues of accelerants which is vaporizable. So that's why you need to put it into the airtight containers. Alright? A search for igniters must also be conducted in the case of matches, electrical sparking device, lighter, okay? So it is important that the sampling of a similar but uncontaminated control specimen should be collected as well. Okay, so you can see here there is there is a char path here for this picture. You can see there is char path. So there might be some accelerants here as well. Okay, so if you want to search for debris, you need to have some sort of like a sifter for you to be able to look through the debris to find whether there is some evidence inside the debris, right? So the combustible material you need to also collect and put in airtight containers, all right? Okay. New clean paint cans with friction leaks are good containers, right? So usually paint cans will be used in terms of collection and preserving the arson evidence. Wide mouth glass jar also can be used for packing materials. So plastic polyethylene bags are not suitable for packing specimen because they react with hydrocarbons and permit vapors to be depleted. Okay, so no for plastic polyethylene bags, right? So if the perpetrator is arrested within a few hours, their clothing may contain residual traces of accelerants, because accelerants will remain inside the fiber, and these accelerants might be left inside the fiber, which that's why we need to find the perpetrator as soon as possible. Okay. So arson sample analysis, so basically the usual instrumentation is going to be gas chromatography, because it is the most sensitive and reliable instrument to detect characterizing flammable residues. So the GC separates the chemical components to produce a chromatographic pattern of a particular fuel. So maybe the fuel they have been using petrol, diesel, kerosene. So all of these combustible liquids have their own pattern. Okay, they have their own fingerprint in terms of their peaks. All right. So usually we use GC lah, right? So by comparing GC peaks that we have recovered from the scene, we can detect the flammable liquids that have been used, right? Okay. So an example of GCMS analysis. Okay, so you need to be able to know this. Okay, if there is a question on how are you going to detect, so what are you going to use? So this goes back to your analytical subjects. Okay, so we are not going to in depth in this, but you need to know on what samples are needed to be used for which instrument. Okay. So this is an example. So when you have analyzed using GC, you can see that there is an unknown. So this is the unknown that you've got from the crime scene. So you analyze GC for a known gasoline. So this is the standard for gasoline. And then when you use ms, you straight away can know that this is gasoline. So this is just for usually this is FID, GCFID, where you need to have a standard, and you have the unknown here. You can straight away say that the unknown is the gasoline because the peaks is the same. All right. Okay, so this is also another example. Gas chromatography of vapor from genuine gasoline sample. So this is the sample, the itself, the real sample lah kita kata. So gas chromatography of vapor of debris recovered at a fire scene. So you can see that the pattern is quite same, but maybe it different in terms of the intensity. Okay, intensity may be different, but the peaks might be the same. So if you have been using GCMS, so you can straight away know what are the peaks straight away. All right. So what can you do to help to prevent arson or arson damage? Okay, so usually if you have noticed any suspicious person or suspicious activities, so you need to report it. Right? If you have a friend or classmates that has set fires in the past or plans to set a fire, tell an adult. All right, your parent, your lecturers, your counselor, even a police officer. Start or participate in community watch program. All right, so usually inside the community kita ada rukun tetangga tu, or even your kawasan perumahan punya community. Alright, so usually these are the things that we can do in order to help minimize arson damage or even arson detection. Okay, install and properly maintain fire alarms in your home and encourage friends and relatives to do the same. So usually I'm not sure whether it has been mandated in Malaysia, but each and every houses should have fire alarms or even a fire detector, smoke detector, right? Because this can give a sign of whether there has been an fire started or even a smoke started, right? So your family should have also plan a fire escape plan for your home, right? All right. So that's all for arson. For the next video, we will look into the explosives.